So
if everyone's ready.
Yeah.
Oh, it's happened. Okay, good morning, everybody. So welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. This is being live streamed. And unfortunately, due to apologies, the meeting as itself is not quorate. So we're effectively meeting informally and making recommendations for formal approval at the next meeting. But this does enable us to get through and give some time to most of the agenda, which will be challenging if we carried it forward. Can I, so first of all, give apologies from councillors Hinchcliffe and Pandore, and also their substitutes aren't available, which is why you've got myself, Tim Swift, chairing today. And can I welcome Councillor Robinson? It's your first meeting of this committee. And also Debbie Simpson, who has been newly appointed as the second independent member, in addition to Joe Wardman. So thank you and welcome. Let me just remind myself, it's constant switching from Teams to Zoom has its moments, doesn't it? So if people want to come in at any point, I'll try and keep a note if you use the raise hand functions, although I can actually see everybody on the screen. So if you just indicate physically, I will try and do that as well. If that covers everything in terms of apologies and welcomes. Item 2 is to ask and remind people of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests. If people are aware of any, can either do that now or if you become aware on any particular item. So, not seeing anybody there. Okay. Item 3, there are no exempt items. So item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of March. Now, I guess we'll have to formally approve these next time, which is probably a good thing, because I'm not sure how many people we've got here who were at that meeting, actually.
I think you're right. There are no members who were at the last meeting, but they have been cleared by myself in the chair, or checked by myself in the chair previously. So
okay, so we'll note those, and wouldn't normally have matters arising unless anybody did notice something they're unfamiliar with, and perhaps as we have new members, if there are any queries from them, please feel free to let us know. Okay. So item 5 is the governance arrangements and forward plan. And Angela, can I ask you to introduce this?
Thank you. Yes, so this paper gives a couple of item parts to it. One is a bit of an update on recent changes in governance arrangements, a confirmation of what the arrangements are for this committee, and a heads up of the sort of shape of the work programme coming up. So the first section goes through some of the changes that have taken place in the broadest sense of governance, recognising a huge time of change as the mayoral functions have come to the combined authority, and a huge amount of work's gone into having to redraft the constitution, putting in place different governance arrangements. They have all been through the annual meeting of the combined authority on the 24th of June, and appreciate the timings of this meeting as such that it's sort of reporting slightly after the event, but thought it was important members were cited on the sheer scale of what has been done. All documents in the public domain. So in effect, our constitutional rule book has been completely reset, recast, and is now our guiding book to how we work. The Governance and Audit Committee itself is largely unchanged from last time. The paragraph 2.6 onwards sets out the terms of reference. The membership arrangements have only changed insofar as there was a request to have the second independent member. So we've recruited to that post, and Debbie is with us now. The meeting dates are set out there. The terms of reference are in Appendix 1, and Appendix 2 is very outline sort of work programme for the coming year, just giving the sort of cycle of things that go through this committee. Happy to leave it at that in terms of what I wanted to say. If any questions, happy to take them.
Okay, thank you. So for those who've been here, there's been a lot of change over the last few months with preparing for the mayoral combined authority, and of course it's too early yet to see whether we've caught everything we need in those changes. I'm sure there'll be things we need to keep under review and look at again as we learn from the year ahead. Are there any questions or observations on any of these? Matthew.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, just a question for Angela. Under 2.5, it talks about resourcing. Do you feel that we're adequately resourced to do this going forward?
I'm just checking the context of that question, and that is in the context of the combined authority. Is you asking, sorry, in terms of the widest, in terms of this committee or the broader team supporting governance arrangements?
The team supporting the governance arrangements, not so much this committee. I'm certain, given the number of people on this call, we're adequately resourced in that department. But actually, it's the team and the back office functions that are there and what's going on.
I think the answer is we are still working through that. We brought in some additional temporary resource during the transition, because until we got to the end of it was a bit unclear exactly what we were going to need going forward. As you'll be aware, there are a number of new committees that have come in. Are they going to require more support or less? We've got scrutiny arrangements that have been enhanced, and we are recruiting an additional post for the scrutiny function. I think it is very likely we'll be looking at the shape of the team providing the governance support. It's not for this committee, but the policing side of things also comes into play, and some of the officers are supporting both sides of that. So I will cautiously say that we are coping at the moment, but I think we are looking at whether we have the appropriate structure and resource to support the arrangements as it becomes clearer what they are and how they play through. And it's one thing to set up a framework and this is how things are going to be. It's a bit of that. We now have to get into it and what is it in practice, and can we manage that? But the team, I think, will happily take away the question of, do they need more resource? It's always difficult to justify it, but we will need to look at whether we need to make the case for it.
Yeah, so we've got a framework. We're now road testing it. We will see how this goes on. I guess a bit of design and build, as they would describe it. So yeah, okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, if we're happy with that, can we note that item and moved on then? Okay. So item 6 is internal control, review of internal control and effectiveness. And I think, Angela, that's you again, isn't it?
It is, thank you. So this report and the next one sort of go hand in hand as part of the year-end review. So we are required under the account and audit regulations to undertake a review of the effectiveness of the system of internal control once a year. We do that through this committee at this meeting. The internal control framework is set out in our corporate governance code and framework. That goes annually to the combined authority for approval. It went in June, but we clearly put the marker down that, having literally just at the same meeting introduced a whole raft of changes to governance arrangements, we were going to need to reword and reshape that governance framework. So there is a task for us to do that, and we'll bring that back to a future meeting of this committee for consideration and approval in due course. So the code sets out the framework, and the annual governance statement that forms part of the annual account sets out how that has worked in the year. The draft annual governance statement, it forms part of the annual accounts, which are currently published as a draft. The AGS went to the combined authority also in June for their input and consideration. It will come back to this committee for a final sign-off with the accounts in September. But in the meantime, it is attached here and gives hopefully some evidence to support the fact that framework has been in place during the year. The other part of the review is around the internal audit, and that is in effect a desktop review by myself this year. Other years, there is a need for an external quality review, and we did that a couple of years ago, and Bron and team have put in a number of changes as a result of the action plan that came out of that. The my conclusion, looking at the work they have done, taking into account the checklist that we have around the public sector internal auditing standards, the evidence from the external report leads to a conclusion that they comply with standards, therefore their work is at an adequate standard, and that when we get to the next item where Bron presents her opinion for the year, it is appropriate for this committee to accept that Bron and the team are working to a standard where you can take that opinion as something to be relied upon. That's not to say we stand still, and positive comments here are simply that's where we are today. We will continue to look at how we can improve and streamline, and certainly with some of the newer structures in place, we need to be really clear how we want to take information and approvals and delegations through, how they all work in the different settings. So we won't stand still, but the conclusion that is reached as in this report is that the internal control environment is sound and the internal audit team is effective. And I'll ask for any comments or questions on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Angela. Okay, questions, comments or observations? Yeah, Debbie.
Thank you. I just have one observation. I think reading through the papers, there was a lot about groups that feed into the governance framework. And I'd just be keen to understand the plans to make sure that officer groups are represented within the reports in sufficient enough to be able to understand the role they play and how well they're performing that role.
Angela,
would you like me to answer that, or take
sure.
Councillor Robinson's question?
Let's take Matthew as well. Yeah, Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Part of the report talks about areas for improvement and benchmarking. I know this is something that we've had a conversation about, Angela, about our comparison with other combined authorities, and making that comparatives. What are the West Midlands? What are Greater Manchester doing? And a piece of work to look at that. And I think it would probably be useful for them too, because they are slightly ahead in their development as a mayoral combined authority than we are. So perhaps allow some more forward planning that we talked about in the previous item.
Thank you. Shall I answer those? So I think in terms of the officer arrangements, because you're quite right, the paper, the annual governance statement sets out the member arrangements. There is a sort of structure underneath of all the officer arrangements. So I'm happy to take that away as an action for us to clarify the work that is going on at officer level, being clear then how it comes through to this committee, because it does, but it doesn't, it's summarised up to come to this level. So we'll set out for the next meeting a bit more about how the work done at officer level and how that then draws out the points that need to come forward to yourselves as those charged with governance to look at. The benchmarking is, you mentioned this last week when we spoke. I think that's a very sensible idea. We certainly network at a finance director level, and I know Bron has an internal audit wider grouping as well across combined authorities, and I wonder whether maybe we draw on those networks to specifically ask a bit about how those, I said, particular larger ones and those with policing in as well, how they have what they have learned in the process. We did some of that in doing the transition work to becoming the mayoral combined authority, but from a governance perspective and how governance and audit committee work is probably we didn't get into that level of detail, and I think we're happy to take that away and look at that for you.
Okay, is that a helpful response? Any other thoughts or comments on those? Okay, if we're therefore content to accept and note those, item 7, right, yes, internal audit report and opinions. So I think this is Bron. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's sort of very self-explanatory, I hope. We write with the intention that we answer the questions before they're asked. But just to give a headline, the annual report and opinion is obviously predicated on audit doing enough work over the course of the year and enough work balanced between advisory and assurance work. well, those committee members that have been here throughout the course of this last year, while COVID has impacted on practically everything, will know that we prioritised doing a lot of advisory work initially. It was partly because of COVID and partly because of the MCA readiness work that the organisation was undertaking. And there was a genuine desire for us to be involved in helping to set things up, look at the governance arrangements, and act in a more advisory capacity at that point. We did all of that, but of course, being a mindful head of audit, I also wanted to ensure we had sufficient assurance work come the end of the year. So we did do a large number of assurance pieces at the end of the year to make sure that we could give a balanced opinion. It did run over, so the first couple of months of the new plan year were about finishing all of the stuff from 2021, but we figured that as everybody had extensions, we didn't see that audit would necessarily be any different. And that has allowed us to actually complete quite a large number of assurance pieces of work. So I'm quite content that the opinion is not limited in any way by scope or volume. The opinion is that systems are adequate. We can see that the organisation has very manfully worked its way through COVID, building in all the additional controls, etc., that were necessary for that, while ensuring that business as usual controls operated effectively. So I am happy to give that opinion and to know that it is a rounded opinion based on sufficient work. We did, of course, have concerns early in the year and some conversations about how that might transpire. In terms of where we go for this next year, we are very mindful that there are opportunities, particularly through the development of a new integrated corporate system, to really transform our HR and finance controls from the point of view of business compliance. We're very anxious for that project to succeed. So we are working both in an advisory and will later be doing assurance pieces around that with sufficient Chinese walls to make sure that where the advice is given, it's not subsequently auditors marking their own homework. So hopefully that gives everybody confidence that work hopefully will see us actually making things a lot more automated, which immediately drives improved compliance, etc. So we are very keen to see that work completing over the course of the next year or so. I'll stop there. Although I could go on forever, but I will stop there. And if anyone has any questions, very happy to take them.
Thanks, Bron. So a couple of general queries, really. I suppose one is obviously COVID and the amount of home working has made everybody's jobs different. But do you think it's had an impact in how robust auditing, internal auditing can be, or that it's been neutral in that regard? That would be one element I'd be interested in. I suppose the other one is a general one about sort of how you feel the organisation's culture is in terms of kind of acceptance and welcoming internal audits, and where that can vary between organisations and parts of organisations as well, and if there's anything we need to think about addressing there.
That is a really interesting question, and it's one that obviously exercises our brains in audit continuously. We had started before the pandemic moving to a more agile methodology of auditing. Because it's a small audit team, we felt there was more resilience in working more as a group and progressing audits as a team. That wasn't possible during COVID, so we went back to a more traditional way of individual auditors undertaking individual pieces of work. So there's definitely been balancing to be done, and where we felt we'd been moving forward in terms of methodology, we've had to sort of rethink that during the course of the year. It's still compliant with the standards, it's still a perfectly acceptable way of auditing. It just, I think for us, felt like we had got customers on the verge of being excited about audit and the new way of doing things, and then we had to sort of try and take a more traditional approach. It's for others to comment on how this is perceived externally, but we've certainly had very good feedback in terms of the way the work's been done, and I think people appreciate that audit is taking as its bottom line mantra that we're here to help the business do better. We're not here to just continually point out the things that aren't working and to make people feel like it's a policing function. We take our compliance side of things very seriously, but we actually really just want to help people improve. And I think that approach has permeated through the team now, and hopefully people are seeing the benefit of that across the board.
Thank you. I'm glad that's been thought about as well. John.
Yeah, I just thought I'd just add, I think my experience of internal audit has always been a positive one, and being in finance, it's an area where we've had a lot of attention, and I always welcome it personally. I've certainly seen a change in my team over the last 4 years or so, where they've very much moved to audit being seen as, helping rather than the ones trying to trip us up all the time. And as Bron knows, I was very keen that internal audit were involved in the internal integrated systems, that we're looking at, and having audit right there, right at the start, as a friendly set of eyes to make sure we don't go down the wrong way. So it's one voice out of many, but all I can say it is really positively received from my perspective.
Thanks, John. Matthew.
Thanks, Tim. Two questions, I guess, for Bron here. One is in the appendices, the performance indicators. It talks about customer feedback. The time being 70%, the actual performance being 50%. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that and what's being done to address that. I know there is an item underneath saying about the low numbers this year, but I'd appreciate a bit more information.
So, I mean, the low numbers is not an understatement. I think everybody felt that the one thing they could put on the back burner was sending back customer feedback forms this year. It certainly wasn't a priority, despite numerous chases. And even then, it did get to the point where we felt we were being more of a hindrance than actually helping our service. But we have participated in a wider corporate services customer feedback event where feedback was sought about all of the corporate services across the business. And so we've taken that on board, and we've put some actions in place to address the feedback from that. We absolutely use the customer feedback to inform our quality improvement plan, which is what quality improvement plans should be used for. So where we get individual feedback, we look at that and try and build it into our improvement processes. The one thing that we have noted is that quite often customers have indicated, and it's very low numbers, so it's definitely not representative, but interesting nonetheless. We felt that it's been more about the communications about audit, what we're here for, understanding our purpose. So we're doing a big revamp of our intranet site. We are going to be hosting quite a lot of work around counter fraud, awareness raising, etc., and we'll build a little bit of the audit into that as well. So I always think it's a two-pronged thing. You can give all the information in the world, but it's when you work with people that you actually get them to understand the value of audit, and you get them to understand the benefits that we can bring to them. So we are absolutely keen to get the customer feedback numbers up, but we recognise we just have not, our feedback forms have not been a priority this year.
Yeah.
We understand that.
Yeah, and I think when you're quite right, when systems interact with people, that's when you can start to modify them and change them and improve them there. So that's really useful. The second question was about, also in appendices, the grant certification work that's in there, and the grants that are included. It mentions the claim value. Is that the total that was bid for, or the total that has been received?
So the claim value is the total that has, well, it's the total that is claimed effectively. So it's what we certify at the end of the day. So where that value has been claimed, we certify that that's correct, etc. I should also point out that because we operate the claim certification in arrears of the claims, what we have here in terms of the annual opinion is effectively Q4, 1, 2, and 3. So it's not the final year in position for the claims. So quite often what we have in here is what we've certified, not the overall claim position. But it's really just to give an understanding of the value of the certification. It doesn't feed into the audit opinion per se, unless we find claims where we believe that there's value in doing an actual audit, because we want to make recommendations for improving either audit trails or systems of control, etc. And there are a few of those on the plan from last year. So it's really just to give an indication of the size of what we're certifying. Some of those are nice round numbers, and they are basically what we've been given as an organisation, and at the end of the day, what we have to certify.
And presumably there could be claims from these same pots from previous years and new claims in the next year as well.
Yes, yes. So it does actually cross over the years. It's not a nice, neat cut-off point, because it's a reflection of when we do the work as opposed to which year the funding relates to.
Funding's coming through, yeah. And just one final question, and then I'm sure we can move on. North Sea Region Programme, yes. 980 quid. I've never seen in 12 years a figure so low in governance and audit report that's there. I'm certain it is, but is that accurate?
It is accurate for that particular claim. There've been some issues with the claims having extended deadlines for making the claims. So at some points, it's been a very interesting year from grant certification points of view, actually, in terms of that. They put a very small claim in to cover some specific costs, but actually there'll be a big claim further down the line, and they've had authority to sort of roll that into one, which will be quite a large claim further down the line. So it's correct, but slightly anomalous looking.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe, and then Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Is it the role, Bron, of the HIA to sign off all the grants, or is this a sample?
So these are the grants where the funding agreements require audit to sign off and certify. So it's not all the grants for the organisation by a long stretch. And we are trying to be very clear that we can only take on those where the funding requirements actually need us to do that, because we're not a big enough team to certify everything. So we are working with all the various directorates to make sure that we only get the ones we need. Yeah.
Thank you. And that takes me on to my next question. Your audit plan is a very ambitious plan, an awful lot of audit reviews on there that, from my experience, it's comparable to a government core department like DWP or Department of Health, which I know you're familiar with. Do you feel you've got sufficient resources to adequately deliver that plan?
So the plan this year is smaller than last year's. I think we learned that lesson last year, and we've been having conversations in this committee around the resources. We are currently recruiting to bring additional resources in for particularly the adult education budget work, and that is a real pinch point for us. We need that recruitment to be successful for us to be able to deliver that. We do have some contingencies in place using agencies, etc., to give us some interim support if we need it. But it's something we just have to keep under regular review, because as the business risks change, the focus in terms of what we're doing may well change, and it could actually significantly impact on us if we don't have the expertise to do what's needed. So we also do have an extra pot of money that can bring in specialist resource to do particular things. But I don't want to underplay, and I think Angela touched on this earlier, for all of our corporate services, this is a different world now. We've got a lot of new priorities and lots of new things to think about. So we are mindful of this, and we are continuing to work with Angela and the rest of her team to look at how we as a corporate service as a whole are meeting the requirements of the business. So I'd say it's very much under review constantly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Debbie.
Thank you. So just 2 points from me. One is a presentational. I just felt it might be helpful to have your list of jobs, work that you've been doing split out so we can more clearly see or readily see the audit work as opposed to the support work. Because I have to struggle a bit to read through everything to say, well, actually, in terms of audit, what have you been doing? The other question I have is around the impact of COVID. I was slightly surprised not to see work done on testing controls, because given the size of the shift in terms of where people worked, how they were working, etc., I was slightly surprised that there wasn't something done to test the robustness of the controls, given the different work environment. So I just wondered how much what the thought process was behind testing during COVID on the impact of COVID working.
I think that's been picked up more in the advisory work, Debbie, than actual control work, because as things have been developed and people have put things in place, so we've actually had quite a lot of teams come to us and say, we're doing this, does that look all right? And frankly, it's one of those horrible situations, isn't it, where after the event is going to be pointless in terms of audit testing. During the event is where you much more want to be on the front foot in terms of what's happening. So lots of the advisory work we did at the beginning of the year, it wasn't advisory in the sense of this is a nice to have. It was very much about what are you putting in place and does that look effective? John mentioned a lot of the integrated corporate system work, looked at the as-is controls. So we were mindful of what was going on now as well as what we needed to build for the future. I've had transport services teams ring me up to say, you know, our bus stations are doing this differently. Does that make sense? And what do you need in terms of audit trails, etc.? So actually people have been more on the front foot than I perhaps would have expected. She says rather shamefacedly, having doubted some of her colleagues, but they have actually sought us out to advise on controls. So it sounds very advice heavy, but it was advice to ensure that actually BAU was happening effectively and we wouldn't end up in a position where we couldn't comment on the controls. So I hope that gives you some assurance that, you know, advice work, it covers a multitude of sins there, because it wasn't about just, you know, think about doing it like this or whatever. It was actually reviewing what was being put in place and giving our confirmation that that was adequate.
That's really useful, thank you. I mean, that didn't come out to me when I was reading the report, and I just wonder if it's worth capturing that, because if anything subsequently were to arise and they then said, well, what did you do during COVID to actually look at the controls, then you've got it captured, haven't you?
Yeah, we can certainly do that, and we do actually keep an advice log.
Yeah,
so we do make a note of all those things.
Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, obviously that point be caught in the minutes of this meeting, but is this the final version of this report, or will you modify it slightly in the light of comments?
It is, and I think what I would do, particularly on the presentation point, is take that forward for next year, because we won't be representing this report. So I take that point, and what we do is we keep the plan exactly as it is when it's first formulated, so that people can actually track that nothing has changed, or we have a good one in terms of making it sort of much clearer. So yeah, happy to take that on board for next year.
Okay, are we happy with that? Thank you for those. So thank you for those points. Thank you for that report. And I think this is you again, Ron, item 8, internal audit process report.
Me in a minute, but yes, me again. So this is very much we are underway with the audit work for 21-22. We obviously had the slight delay at the beginning of the year, finishing off the plan for 2021. But we have made a start on a number of the reviews. And it's really, as you can see in the paper, I don't really, it's obviously it's start of the new year. We haven't got any changes to the plan that I need to advise you of at this point. It's very much as was agreed in March. I'm sure things will change, however, and we will bring that back to this committee as and when that happens. So obviously there's a lot of work over the course of the year, but a much better balance this year in terms of doing insurance work sooner rather than later in the year.
Thanks. You mentioned on the staffing issues on the last item, particularly looking for somebody to support work with the adult education budget. Presumably knowing the lovely ways of the public sector, that's presumably brought in a whole host of separate jargon, rules, requirements, and a world of initials all of its own, has it? Yeah, I suspected it would. Any questions or comments on the progress report? Obviously, this is early in the year, so become more significant at next meeting, I would imagine. Okay, so happy to note that. Then I'll take us on to item 9, which is the external audit progress report. And I think this will be you, Mark. Is there anything you want to say first, Angela? Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just start, it's a sort of report of 2 parts, really. I'll do the second part first. So there's some updates there around external audit matters. There's an appendix. It sets out some of the next steps on the Redmond review, and some information about the arrangements around PSAA Limited, who we use to appoint auditors, and to flag that there will be something coming forward over the summer into the autumn that requires us to look at those arrangements again. So we will be bringing that back to the meeting in future. Going in reverse, we have talked previously about the expected fee increase for the audit work for the current year, sorry, for 1920. It's been trailed. We've talked about it a couple of times. It's now landed, and it's set out in the paper here in terms of how it was made up. For the avoidance of doubt, this wasn't because our audit preparation within the Combined Authority was inadequate or incomplete. It was additional requirements that external auditors were required to bring in at a late stage once fees had already been set. But I'm sure Mark will happily explain that one to you if anyone has questions. We are in the middle of the current year, the audit for the 2021 accounts. We have completed those. They've been approved as draft and are out on the internet at the moment. Auditors have started their work, and at Appendix 1 you've got an update on progress from Mark and team. We are intending to get the accounts to the committee on 30th of September. You may recall it's been challenging in previous years because of some of the external requirements around pension fund, for example. And you will also be aware that there are many authorities who have had huge delays at getting approval to their annual accounts, and we have a good track record here. And not setting Mark up at all, but if perhaps Mark would like to raise any points in his appendix and between us we'll take any questions on anything in the paper from the committee after that.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Chair. So it is a really simple progress report from us on this occasion. I will take it as read, Chair, but in terms of headlines, much of which Angela has covered, we have received the draft financial statements from the authority. Our work is underway. The external audit does remain very much on track, and we do fully expect to report our findings to the late September Governance and Audit Committee meeting. Just to add to what Angela has said, and is covered on page 162, sorry, I beg your pardon, page 62 of your pack, the National Audit Office has extended the deadline for us to report our new style value for money commentary, and they've extended that to the very end of this calendar year. And on that basis, we will report not to the September Audit Committee, but to the committee thereafter, our value for money commentary, which will be included within the new style auditor's annual report. In section 2 of our report, we do provide a summary of recent national publications. These are provided very much for your information only. I won't cover those in any detail, but as Angela said, I think we'd be happy between us to take any questions that committee members may have on any aspect of the paper.
Thank you very much. Debbie.
Just a quick question, and apologies if I've missed it in the paper, but who sets the materiality level for the audit?
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, so we do set the materiality level for the audit. That is detailed within our audit strategy memorandum, which came to the March Governance and Audit Committee meeting. Well, you're putting me under great pressure now, Debbie, because you're perhaps going to ask me what level we've set that at. Having received the draft financial statements, we have ever so slightly updated it with headline materiality at £7 million, which is 2% of your gross expenditure. That 2% is very much in line with the other bodies across the local government sector. So yeah, £7 million is the headline level of materiality. I hope that's helpful, Debbie.
Thank you. And do you include cumulative spend to that level with the same supplier, for instance, if you're looking at suppliers?
Absolutely. So that is a cumulative level. We would group together any misstatements that we identify, and if in aggregate they breach that materiality level, that would clearly cause us, and I guess you guys, an issue in terms of the audit opinion. I think it's perhaps worth me saying, because I'm sure Angela or John would if I didn't, we don't have a history of significant misstatements at West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Let's see what this year brings, but I think we'd all perhaps be a little bit surprised if there were significant problems with the quality of the accounts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other points on this?
Can I just chip in? And it builds a little bit, I think, on what Angela said in relation to, shall we say, audit fees. And I suppose in part it's just about adding to the picture around managing your expectations. It is clear that the direction of travel for audit fees is upwards. The committee may recall when we presented the audit strategy memorandum to the March committee meeting, that there is upward pressure on audit fees. The government is making an additional £15 million available to local government bodies, including combined authorities, to help them meet those increased demands. So in a sense, I could stop there, but this is me seeking to manage your expectations that not just this year, but for the next few years, there is likely to be an increase in your external audit fee.
Thank you, that's understood. I say the chair of our audit committee in Calderdale, who's not from the same party as myself, would always ask the external auditor if there's any prospects of the fees going down, but I do understand why there is a drive around the fees at the moment. Clearly what we want is to be sure we're getting good value for money, and that the audit work is not simply ticking boxes, but is really providing challenge and helping us to improve. And I'm sure that's what we were looking for.
I think we probably should add that the audit fee is under review for future years, and that will be coming back here because of the scale of change to becoming a mayoral authority and the interaction with the policing arrangements, whereby we're required to do group accounts for the police. The police produce their own accounts, but there is a set of group accounts. So the audit arrangements and the fees are under review for the police and ourselves, and we will be bringing that through the appropriate consultation routes and which includes yourselves in due course. I don't think we've got dates for that. I think it's all in the background happening slowly, but it will come forward to you hopefully by the next meeting.
Yeah, absolutely appreciate it's both scale and complexity is likely to change. Okay, any more on that one? Then can we receive and note those reports and go on to compliance and monitoring? So it's back to you, Angela.
It is, thank you. This is the standard report you get every time on compliance and monitoring, covering internal controls, risk and finances to an extent. So the confirmation in here around internal controls that there have been no breaches of internal controls in the period did reflect when we were writing this about changes to internal controls, and despite the scale of change in governance terms, actually much of the detail of the internal controls remains unchanged. There have been changes in delegations and where decisions are made, but actually when you get that down through the key controls over the finance system, for example, they remain the same. And I think picking up on the earlier point, work was done to ensure that people could still fulfill those controls remotely. A lot of stuff was being done electronically, but the team did the finance team in particular did put in place arrangements to ensure that approvals were done in a suitable way, in a hybrid and remote working way, and that was all appropriately documented and with involvement from audit in some instances. Flag here Treasury Management, where we do provide you with an update on any concerns arising from Treasury Management. At the time of writing, we're just about to go into the quarterly meeting. There were no concerns flagged there that require reporting. Again, just to flag that there has been some slight changes because of the policing side coming in alongside, and we will be having to look at those Treasury arrangements before the end of next year. I think the key challenge is around placing funds with suitable counterparties, and our the team at Leeds who work with us under an SLA are looking at if there's any ways to broaden those opportunities. Key indicators are all the same. There's no change in terms of RIDORs, and financial controls are all in place and properly monitored. There's a little bit here on financial reporting. We usually bring this through this committee, and it helps in terms of signing off the annual accounts when they come. I think to note we have got a Finance Resources Committee now as well, and they will be taking a look at some of the numbers in greater detail as part of their remit. But position there on page 80, setting out the outturn for the year, which was better than expected. We had been, it was clearly a very, very difficult year to judge with the pandemic, changing goalposts every day and every week. We did very well at lobbying for funding. We are still, however, in a position of significant unknowns going forward, particularly around bus recovery funding. And we will be diving into the budget work imminently and having to consider how that plays through going forward. We've noted there was a surplus that we need to consider how that is used, whether that's how we can meet some of the growing demands and commitments on the authority, and the level of that surplus is being earmarked to meet the election costs, many of which have fallen in this year when we budgeted for them in last year, but the means by which the local authorities have run the election means the costs are falling in the current year when the elections took place rather than earlier as we had anticipated. And risk management, the headline strategic risks are in the appendix in the paper, largely unchanged since last time. We've closed off the mayoral transition ones. We're probably in a world now just making sure as we update our business plan for the current year following the arrival of the mayor, we just need to make sure our risks align with the new business plan, and we'll bring an update to the next meeting for you. I will stop there and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So covers quite a bit. Is it just worth picking up and mentioning, Angela, the sort of slight change in governance arrangements around finance with the creation of the new, I forget exactly what it's called, but the new finance committee?
It is Finance Resources and Corporate Committee, which is we're intending that to, in terms of reference, are set out to be able to take a wider look at some of the corporate activities that take place. The governance type ones come here, but there are others that don't have a natural home at the moment, and it will give more opportunity for scrutiny and consideration in a committee rather than full combined authority. So our procurement strategies, for example, could be considered through there, and they will be helping us through the budget process. Budget is a decision for the combined authority to make, but in previous years it's been helpful to have some more detailed workings outside of that meeting in order to go with a clear set of options and positions. So the Finance Committee will be looking at the numbers on an ongoing basis in more detail.
Thanks, Angela. Matthew.
Thanks, Tim. Two questions, if that's okay, Angela. One is around cybersecurity. It's listed as high rather than very high, with a large proportion of staff working from home, probably staff continuing to work from home going forward. Is there a risk that could go to very high, and what has been done in anticipation of that, or are plans already in place that we would drop lower? Second was the second is something that you mentioned around the bus services, and bus services coming, the commercial bus services threatened with withdrawal. Within the report, it talks about the review and adapt current mechanism to appraise social and commercial value of threatened services. How's that going to happen?
I will take the easier question first. Cybersecurity. The challenge with cybersecurity is, however good all the systems and controls you have, you can never be immune from the brand new piece of ransomware, or whatever somebody dreamt up yesterday will not have been patched in time when it hits your system today. So it will always be on the risk register. I don't think we'll ever get it off there. I think your question was whether it should be higher. We have done quite a lot of work around our ICT systems recently. We've just about completed a 3-year program of updating, ensuring everyone is on the same standard of hardware with the same level of encryption, for example, that we've got all our systems, all our records kept in the cloud now. They are, the right firewalls are in place, we have the right defenses. We have recently undergone the Cyber Essentials accreditation, and that's confirmed that we have a number of good measures in place. It's highlighted some further ones we might wish to continue and build on, but we have achieved that industry standard of Cyber Essentials. So we're certainly not complacent. We continue to train people every year as a reminder about the simple things. You can have the best encryption in the world, but don't work on the train with somebody looking over your shoulder. Human error will always find a way around the best systems in the world. So we do keep a focus on employee behaviour as well. So we'll keep that under review. Can bring some more, we'll add some more information around mitigation in terms of the cybersecurity work that we've done, and some of the upcoming ICT work that will help embed some of what we've done through the Cyber Essentials work. Your second question was around the risk on bus services, and I think there is a real challenge at the moment that the whole bus industry is in a state of flux. That the old model where where bus operators ran services that were commercially viable and we filled the gaps, and we had a range of parameters where we would step in and we'd top up the network to give a viable network, has all changed during COVID, and the rules of the way we put networks together is different. The way we are funding the operators to fund a slightly different network than the one we ask them for is different. So I think at the moment we're flagging there is change. I think the detail of how that's going to flow through will come through some of the work on enhanced partnerships, which has been approved at the Combined Authority. I'd have to come back to you with the detail of the mechanisms we're going to use to draw up those services. I think we're still a work in progress. Yeah, I'm happy to provide an update.
That if you would, that would be useful. Yeah. I can understand how you will measure commercial value. How you measure social value risks being in the eye of the beholder here. And I think that every single ward councillor across the whole of West Yorkshire will be saying that there is incredible social value for every bus service in their area, and how a measure is come up with would be of interest to everybody, I think. Yeah,
that's fine. You're right. We receive many requests for bus services, and we do have some standards about accessibility, and nobody should be further than a certain distance from a suitable bus service. But I'll get the team to do a little bit more detail on that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. 2 things from me, please. Firstly is in terms of the risk and risk register. I found it quite hard to give any rigorous challenge around it because I just didn't feel there was sufficient information. So for instance, I didn't know what the direction of travel was for the risk. Is it an upward trend? Is it a downward trend? I wasn't sure how long they'd been on the risk register. So have they been sitting there for ages, which might indicate that the mitigations aren't sufficiently robust. So I'd just be interested to know if we could have a little more detail around that, and maybe a deep dive into some of the risks at some stage if they are stagnating there and not moving at all. My second thing is on 2.13 and 2.14. They both talk about significant risks. And then when I looked on the risk register, they weren't there. So I was just wondering what the mechanism is to ensure that we have the right things appearing on that risk register.
I think your first comments are very helpful. We have had a direction of travel and we seem to have lost it from this. And so we'll reinstate that because absolutely accept that's helpful. I'll pick up with the team, the performance team, whether we can have an idea of the date, because I think a number of these have been here for a while. They're sometimes adapted and tweaked and moved on, but I'm sure we can start to at least put a history against them. The deep dive, shall I suggest we look at some of the, if I take that as an action, look at those, the very high risks, and pick the ones that have been there the longest, perhaps, and bring back a bit more of a deep dive and see, and maybe it could be something you want to do a couple each meeting. It could be you want a session separately on it. Maybe something you want to consider as a future committee meeting, but we'll do a start on a deep dive on a couple of them, because many of these flow up from more detailed risk registers below them. So I think we've got a summarized, summarized position here, and there is more detail that we could provide. So happy to do that.
Thanks, Angela.
Sorry, I think there was a second point as well.
Yeah, sorry, you carry on.
I'll pick up the second point. Sorry, I've not ignored it. There has usually been a general funding risk on here about not meeting our objectives, and I'll just check that's brought out enough, because we talk a lot. You are right. We talk a lot about the risks of the funding model for combined authorities and the funding, particularly for bus, and just need to make sure they haven't been lost in the summary in here. I'll make sure they're definitely brought out enough in the next iteration.
Thank you.
Thanks. Point I was raised about risk, you probably partly answered by saying there's kind of deeper risk registers behind these, but I was just looking at the very first one, the failure to fully deliver programs. I mean, which I guess is always going to be a high risk because of the high impact. But I mean, I guess the drivers behind that are changing, and I suppose I'm particularly worried at the moment, kind of the impact that kind of triple factor of shortage, lack of available people, both skilled people in terms of design because of the level design and management, but also actually in terms of delivery now as well, we're seeing that, but also significant problems of supply chains for construction, which we're hearing from everybody from the smallest to the largest businesses, and then those two in turn, of course, not only adding to time delays but driving costs up as well. So so I think whilst the headline risk doesn't change, I guess I feel at the moment probably there's probably a range of factors driving that, particularly some which are quite difficult to mitigate, I recognise as well.
I'm happy we could pick that as one of the risks to bring back next time with a bit more detail, because you're right, that one I don't think will ever go away. We have some heroic deadlines set by government for some of our funding, and that, as you say, brings a whole set of challenges as to how do you do the right projects in the right timescales with all those issues against us. So I'll mark that one down as one that we will focus on next time, and we'll find another of the longer serving risks and do the same.
Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions or comments on this? Okay, thank you. We'll take that with those comments then, and I think that brings on to the final item, annual accountability reporting.
Yeah, that's me again. Thank you. So this is a requirement of our processes, is to bring a annual report about complaints and concerns raised against the LEP board to this meeting. And the Combined Authority one went to the Combined Authority last time. There have been no such complaints raised this year. And we also provide a summary of applications where there's been a conflict of interest declared and what the outcome of that was. And that there's been 2 in the year. They have been set out. They followed the process that we have, which is part of our constitution now. And the information is in the report there on the applications that were considered in the year. Happy to take any questions, but in effect, it's almost a nil report.
Thank you. questions or comments, anybody? Okay, so happy to note that one. Anything else people feel we've missed elsewhere on the agenda as we're meeting fairly informally, or anything as new members people would have expected to see that perhaps we haven't? Just a bit of an opportunity. And I pick up, Angela, you've been briefing people, and obviously you're always happy to pick things up with people outside of the meeting and feed them back in as well. So so I think that's covered everything. Thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions and your time this morning. Hopefully we'll do better at getting colleagues here for future meetings, and we'll be fully core at the next time. I think it's been helpful. Hopefully it's been helpful to everybody to still spend this time to go through and pick up these things this morning. So thank you very much, and have a productive remainder of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.